Okay, Rebecca, you think we should get started?
Um, I think let's give everybody 2 minutes at least.
Okay.
Will, do we have anyone else signed up?
Um, Let me double check. No. No, we do not.
Okay, then I think we can get started.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am Felice Farber. I am co-chair of the Budget Committee, along with Rebecca Dangor. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the mayor's preliminary budget and the responses to that preliminary budget. The community board's input on the budget is one of the charter mandated functions of community boards. The charter mandates that community boards consult with agencies on the capital and expense budget needs of the district, hold public hearings, prepare capital and expense priorities, and react to the funding choices presented in the preliminary budget. So tonight we'll be able to respond to the city's response to our needs, district needs that were presented in the fall in our district needs statement. Rebecca, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, is anyone here, any board member here, who maybe is not on the budget committee? Did you receive all of the documents from Will, or do you need us to send them to you?
There were only the ones that were just on the website, so that's all I shared. So can you hear me?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So everybody should have access to it. I'll put the link to the website page in the chat. So if anybody wants to refer back to it.
And then, Will, do you want to put it up on the screen as well so we can
Absolutely.
walk through it?
So, um, so like I said, the documents are here linked in the agenda. And just while I'm doing this, I'm going to put this in the chat for everybody. So if they want to open it on their own device. So we have the register here. I'm going to make it a hair bigger so it's a little easier to read. And it gives you some information, basics of what to do. And then we have, this is the capital budget priorities up at the top. So as you want me to move, just let me know and I'll scroll.
Okay, great. So we will prepare a letter after the meeting today responding to the city's comments on our capital budget requests. For the most part, in having skimmed through the system and through the response, there's a lot of hunting, is my take on this. So go ahead, Rebecca.
I just wanted to add one other thing. So I saw a lot of, please contact the agency directly and promptly for more information. Will, is this one of their, they didn't get to it? Is this a new version, or do you have any insight as to?
Yeah, I haven't asked. So what Rebecca's referencing is last year they had a different code for The agency basically didn't respond, meaning that they had sent the request to the agency, but basically there's a little bit of a dance between the agency's timeline of turning theirs in and our timeline of turning ours in. And we turned ours in much later than we normally do. We were not the last community board to turn ours in, but we were amongst the last to do it because we actually had to ask for an extension and turn our district needs statement in after the deadline. So it is highly likely that some of these initial responses from the agencies are going to be unsatisfactory compared to our, I mean, even more unsatisfactory compared to our normal ones, because the agencies were given less time. That's the most rosy version of the story that you could imagine. And so I would imagine if you get rote responses that you know are repetitive, saying things like please contact the agency directly, it's OMB, their way of saying the Office of Management and Budget, who oversees the city budget and these responses, is their way of saying they didn't get an answer from the agency and that we should bug them to get an answer. That made sense?
Yes, thank you. So in the first capital budget priority, we asked for additional funding for NYCHA. And I know NYCHA is woefully underfunded, although they do have a huge capital program right now. They commented that NYCHA has provided funding in prior fiscal years. And this may be an example of where we want to reach out to get additional information. What have they provided funding for the Isaac and Holmes Towers? What's been done? And then maybe talk to some of the board members who live in those facilities and ask them for more specific information about what they think is needed. I mean, they're tenant association leaders, so they should have a good finger on the pulse of what's needed in those in that housing.
I think also, you know, they are essentially telling us to contact the elected officials, which I think is part of what our letter is, right? So if we want to have a line flagging this for our local officials, we can do it that way as well.
Okay.
And I think for number 2,
go ahead.
I know Judy's here, so maybe she can speak after I read their response. This was for the 19th precinct. Their response was initial design and estimate have been completed for a new HVAC system. A new need request will be submitted to fund project scope. Do you think that is sufficient, Judy, or do you still want us to highlight this in our letter? Because I know it's been a couple of years that this has been a top concern. Oh, Judy's audio is not connected.
There, I don't understand. A new need request will be submitted to fund project scope. Who's submitting this new need request? We are? Somebody from the government will?
NYPD would. So basically, if my understanding is correct, that they had an expert come in and say this is how much it's going to cost, and then the 19th precinct needs to turn around and request that exact amount from OMB to be funded. And it may be to OMB, but it also may be to the city council through their capital needs and through the borough president for their capital budget. But basically say, like, declaring this is how much it costs. We know now how much it costs. This is what we're going to need to do this.
So Judy, you meet with the 19th precinct fairly regularly, I believe. Can you, when you next meet with them, inquire as to what the estimate is and where they are on this project?
Judy, you're still unmuted.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little behind in all this stuff lately, and my time hasn't quite been my own. Will, what we're looking at, um, can I print this later?
Absolutely, yeah. This is on our website. If you go to today's agenda, I'm just gonna do this really quickly so that everybody sees it. If you go to today's agenda, you're on our website, cb8m.com. You've gone to our calendar.
Right.
Just again, showing people how to do this. You go to our calendar, you click on today's agenda, you see now it actually has the video up, but you go down to today's agenda and the budget, the agenda item, and you see there's a list of documents. The first document is the document that we've been looking at.
Okay.
It is the list of responses for our capital and expense
Okay. I
requests.
just wanted to know where to find it. So then
Yeah.
next week I'll try and how quickly do you need an answer, Felice?
And that's
Before
actually
the full
out really
board
quickly
meeting.
before you continue. The next item is actually an info statement on the preliminary budget and how to fill it out and fill out this letter that we're going to create. And it has the deadline in it that Felice or Rebecca will tell you. It's right before our next full board meeting, so we're not going to vote on this letter as a full board. So whatever you guys decide
Oh, okay.
and the chair signs off on is what you guys will end up sending. And so, as an example, you have last year's letter that we sent to OMB in the city attached, just as a reference. Our letters don't change too much from year to year.
Okay,
Um,
I will follow up on this next week and let you chairs know what I find out.
Or would you like the office? Would you like the office to shoot an email to the 19th precinct?
If you did that, Will, who would you write to?
Lombardi, probably.
Well, yeah.
Will, can you do, I'm sorry to ask that, but things have been a little crazy here.
Yeah.
Could you do that? And if you don't get an answer by Wednesday of next week, then I'll follow it up.
And my request, what I'm asking is just
What have they done? Where's this in the process?
oh yeah,
Even
where this
requests
is in the
are-
process. Okay.
Yeah,
I would
even
say
if they haven't,
they,
go ahead.
I would say, have they done this? And also, if they are concerned at all, would they like us to highlight it in our response letter?
Yeah. And do they actually have an estimate? This says they do, but do they?
It seems like they do, but it would be strange for them to.
Bye.
But I'll flag this.
Okay. And would you let me know by the middle of next week if they haven't gotten back to you? Then I'll follow it up.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle?
Yeah, thanks. No, I wanted to add, looking at this, it seems as though they have a design, they have an estimate, so they know what equipment they're going to install. And in the follow-up, and I'd like to see it in our letter, can we request that it be in by this summer?
I don't think the
I'd
city's
like to
procurement,
highlight that.
I don't think the city's procurement process would allow that to happen, but I don't see
Well,
the downside in asking.
Yeah, exactly.
So we can try. This is not the first year we've had this in our request.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They've been on alert for a while, and the fact that they have the design, that means they know, there'll only be a certain amount of vendors that they're dealing with. So if they have the design and if they have an estimate, then they've chosen a vendor. And so I think that's sort of urgent, and I'd like to get that on their radar now, because the closer you get to the summer, the least likely it is that it happens, just because these companies will be inundated and busy and whatever. So if they could work on that and get that going, in the winter months, so that it's done by the summer, I think that's really important. We've been talking about this for a long time.
I agree.
And
Does
I will
anyone
say,
disagree?
this is the furthest
You can do
along.
the X.
This is the
Right,
furthest
I don't
along
think
we've
anyone.
gotten. Oftentimes they just say we're studying it. Now they actually are saying they've done something.
Yeah, which tells
Yeah.
me they made a choice.
Yeah, but the city just doesn't move that. You're right, Michelle, but the city doesn't move that quickly. Has to go out for bid. It takes forever. But no harm in asking.
Yeah, and also the
I'm
fact
thinking
that it says
also,
an estimate, then they are dealing with a company, because it doesn't say estimates in a plural. So it may be that they're closer to the selection than we realize, and let's sort of put it on their radar.
I think
and we can also, we can request a follow-up as well. Like, in 3 months or something, we would like an update on the
Well, I
project
think 3
status.
months is too late. February, March, April. I mean, once you start to approach the warmer months, the likelihood of getting it done this year becomes less and less. I'd like to put a little urgency on here and say we've talked about, if you're going to include a letter and you have commentary, then I see no harm in saying we've been asking for this for a few years. We're happy to see that you're closer, to a selection, and we'd like to request that the installation be prior to these summer months. I see no harm.
Okay. We'll add that.
So for the next one, this is the first example of, oops, I'm on the wrong page. The first example of please contact the agency directly and promptly for more information. I think we as a group should quickly think about how we want to handle these, because I might want to put some of them in the letter, right? Because they're important to us, but I wouldn't want to do that without actually contacting the agency and doing what we were told, even though I think it might be their response. So does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, what does it mean when they say contact the agency? Are you actually going to get a person on the line that
So
can
Michelle,
actually
Michelle,
do
that
this?
means that the Department of Environmental Protection, and the amount of time between when we submitted our district needs statement and when they were required to respond to it, they did not have enough time to submit a written response. So if they say contact the agency, you can send an email to the agency. Essentially, basically, what I would say here is that we say to OMB that we need responses from the agencies and that they should provide us an updated version of this register once they've received those actual written answers from the agencies.
So in other words, they don't do that automatically?
Who's they in that sentence?
Well, that's exactly my question.
Yes, so the agent, so OMB takes our document, chops it up for each agency, and sends just the relevant sections to each of those agencies. Then the chief of staff, the commissioner, whoever, all come together, sit down, and they're supposed to respond to not just ours, but the other 59, all 59 community boards. And whatever reason, I don't work for those agencies, they didn't respond in time to get it published to our sections. And so
Are we sure though? I mean, I think so too, but I'm not 100% sure.
I'm not 100% certain. I can definitely ask Trammell from OMB if that is actually the case. But basically, this mimics what they did last year, but just with a less infuriating response, which was contact the OMB Community Board Affairs Unit, was what they said last year. But this year says contact the agency directly, because OMB essentially knows they're doing their job to advocate for us to get these answers. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's each commissioner from each of these other agencies that must turn in their homework, essentially. And so if we are putting pressure on them, as well as pressure coming from OMB, I'm condensing some of the things that they've told me personally, and also things that they've shared, with other community boards, with these types of responses, is that they are trying their best, and they're a bunch of budget nerds, trying their best to corral commissioners who are digging sewers and stuff to actually be responsive in a timely manner.
Do
You
we
know, so
want to,
we don't know for sure. We
sorry,
can ask, but
I think we should ask, but I think we could also maybe reach out to the agencies. You know, I'm sure they're overlapping, right?
mhm.
Agencies. And we can maybe give them, the letter is due February 15th. So, I mean, I think the most we could give them is 12 days. And then at least if they don't respond or, you know, answer in any type of way, that's something if we wanted to include in our letter, we could. Because then we
Yeah.
followed through with what we were instructed.
And they'd also asked us to be more specific, so we may want to follow up and just say, you know, we'd like to know that you've cleaned the storm drains on East End Avenue between 88th and 90th Street. Can you provide us with an update on that? You know, and even just ask for like what, you know, what's an update on why the FDR Drive flood, you know, after the FDR Drive in the 70s floods, what's the larger issue there?
You know, that flood on the FDR Drive goes back for as long as I can remember. I mean, 20, 30, however many years, not only in the 70s, but in the 90s. They have had engineers look at it. They never came up with a
I have my
reason.
picture up.
Excuse me. Oh, anyway, I don't know that they ever actually, well, many years ago, they claimed they had engineers look at it. They didn't come up with a specific cause. It's probably something that would entail tearing up the whole drive. I think maybe they don't want to know the answer. So that's been going on as far back as I could remember. I mean, decades, not years, decades.
So
Okay.
I did want to just say one thing, and then I'll turn it over to you for. Oh no, I'm one ahead. Do you want to do 4 and I'll do 5?
Yeah, let's move on. Okay, 4 is additional funding for safe havens. Again, this is something we've asked for before. And the response was contact the agency directly. I vaguely recall seeing a press release on the city doing more about this. I don't know if I'm hoping that there was something, but
Wasn't the one on 91st Street turned down because there was a zoning issue?
So that's not exactly correct. You guys may have noticed in today's newsletter that there's a new Health, Seniors, and Social Services Committee meeting that's slated for later this month. We did get an update from the Department of Homeless Services that they are ready and excited to present their new service provider who has been enlisted for that site with the intention of opening in December.
So Will, do you think we need to include this in the letter to show our continued support and be specific, or do you feel confident that it's going to move forward?
So I mean, at this point, I'm confident that it's moving forward if they're coming to us to talk about it. That being said, we're sort of in between a rock and a hard place here because, you know, we did give support for the previous iteration of this in, you know, a form of a resolution, being supportive of it. Obviously, there have been a few model changes that, you know, include Goddard leaving and services for the underserved coming in. You know, so there is a cart and horse sort of situation here where it probably does make sense for us to actually hear from services for the underserved before we, you know, add it to our letter that we, you know, are supportive of this exact model or whatever. But that, you know, we could say, you know, we're excited that there has been continued work on it, or that there's new updates, and that we're, you know, excited to work with DHS on it. You know, I mean, that's
Would that
Parliament.
take
You're right,
another
because
resolution?
this-
Would that, because it's a
Yeah,
different
yeah.
company, it would take another
So I
resolution?
think
It does.
I
It's
think
not
it
coming
would.
before us as a discretionary. They're not expecting a resolution. They weren't expecting a
However, if this
resolution
was
necessarily in the first case, but getting a resolution in support of it is always a good message, signal that we welcome them into the community. So
I think that,
Yeah.
sorry, well, I think that since the full board isn't voting on the letter, and I don't remember the resolution specifically, but I do believe we expressed our support for Goddard itself,
we did
right?
both.
So I
yes.
think,
Right.
yeah, so I think we should, if we say anything at all, and we can talk about that in the letter section, I have a note to re-bring it up. We can't get specific. Barbara?
But yeah, I was going to say just what Will said, that we are having a meeting. There, in fact, is an agency. There wasn't a zoning problem that caused it. It was a different lawsuit, the zoning loss, but this may be a different model. And I don't know if Will knows more since I've talked to him last, but I'm not sure what the model will be. I don't think anything as good as Goddard, but that's my own personal worry about it. I would like to add something, because when we had our monthly meetings with Goddard, we talked about wanting more security and more things like that maybe, and I wonder if we should keep, but that would not be capital budget.
No.
So I don't know
But-
what the capital budget for this. I assume they have money to build the thing. I mean, I've seen the picture on the billboard for a year or so.
Well, let me ask if this would be a response that we could put in the letter that folks would agree to. Similar to what Willis has stated, we're pleased that there's been continued work on this issue, and we look forward to hearing from whoever's coming to present at an upcoming meeting, and we'll provide additional comments or something like that.
That's good.
Yeah.
And my
And-
question
all
to
right,
you,
so
Will,
now-
is who is coming? Is it just DHS or is it the provider also?
Both. Yeah.
Good,
it's
good. I do want the
it's-
provider there. Okay.
Yeah, that I was told it's going to be both. On the agenda, it's listed as both. And
Is
from
it
what
on?
for what
I
it's
just
worth,
looked and I didn't see it on the agenda. It is on the agenda.
it is. Yeah.
Okay,
And for
good.
what it's worth, I spoke to other district managers at the monthly borough service cabinet meeting, and several of them have services for the underserved working in their districts, and they only had nice things to say.
Yeah, I know. Tricia said that. I spoke to Tricia about it and she said it. So I'll be very positive about it.
Yeah, Trisha was in that same meeting.
All right.
So
So we'll move on to number 5, and this one I wanted to flag because it was about making the 67th Street Library accessible. This is something that we've requested before. I did not appreciate the response that further study by the agency, of this request is needed. I would like us to flag it in our letter, which we did last year. I don't see why, after years of requesting, making all of our libraries accessible. I mean, we did it kind of library by library, that they would still be saying that they need to do a study. If a study is needed, they should have done it last year. And if anyone has anything else to say on that or disagrees with highlighting it in our letter, please raise your hand.
Yeah, I think I
But
would
I'm
just
hoping,
I think I would just emphasize in the response that the lift that they have in the library it regularly does not work, and it needs to be replaced to provide accessibility for everybody. What's the point of having
yes.
a lift if it doesn't work?
And the reason we wanted to have this meeting, and then I'll call on CJ, as early in February as we could, is because I think we want to have a very thoughtful letter this year, and I would like, and hopefully we'll have time, to be able to list the number of years we have requested certain things, because I think that just makes our request stronger. So CJ.
Hi. Yeah, I totally agree with flagging this. And one thing that we could put in a letter is that the adult section is all upstairs. So when the elevator is out of order, people who are older and do not have mobility, do not have access to the upstairs floor.
Brilliant. We'll definitely include that. Thanks for your comments. And the next one is to provide more affordable housing for all income, very low, low and middle income New Yorkers. The agency will accommodate this issue within existing resources. I mean, that's not really a response to what we asked, because we asked for more. But if anyone has any comments or wants to make sure we flag this in the letter, raise your hand.
I mean, affordable housing is always an issue. Is there something that we can say to make this more specific about what we would want them to do for affordable housing? And I think the City of Yes for housing is coming up. I don't know whether it gets addressed there, but and what would they do about building more affordable housing?
So probably what you guys as a budget committee should explore in future iterations of this request is you should identify specific programs that can be used by HPD so that we advocate for that program to be increased in budget. So it's a little bit more specific. This is obviously also a capital side, not the expense side. But if there are capital programs that they have that are revenue streams or that they offer, rebates or tax exemptions or whatever it is to help affordable housing development, that we ask for, the city to increase funding for that program. And then, they could actually be a little bit more specific of, this program has gone up or gone down over the last so many years. That's just an idea of something that you could maybe bolster this request next year.
And our district needs statement for 2025 is not on the website yet, right? Well,
no, they have not published them in their pretty form, so I have not received it to put it up. And actually,
well,
I think our old one is also missing large chunks. And I identified that for them, and they're supposed to be sending me a new version of that as well.
That's great. I don't remember 100%, but I'm 99% sure that, as we have done every year, affordable housing has been one of our top issues. So I think the board is pretty strong on record. I think if we want to include it at all, we can kind of do something in an introductory sort of way, and we don't need to specifically talk about this request. Barbara.
Yeah, I'm confused. Is this asking the city to build the affordable housing, or is it to do something to help private developers to build affordable housing?
Doesn't specify.
Because I think there's two different issues. If it is private, one of the things, Will, you'll tell me I'm wrong, is that the 421, any tax abatement, whether it's 421 or another program that they're talking about, is going to be important. They're not building, as we heard from William Friedland.
We can't request private companies or people to do things in these requests.
So in other words, this is saying, city, I want you to build this. Is that true? Is that correct?
Not necessarily. And so one thing, 421A is a state policy. This is directed, our request is directed to a specific agency at the city, the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. And that's sort of the city's arm to help create affordable housing. So they offer a number of programs and subsidies that help either the city themselves build something. Usually that's pretty rare. Or they finance, at low cost loans, or they give like rebate incentives for when you guys hear these proposals for like an affordable housing building going up by Extel or Related or whoever, right? They've been working with HPD to take advantage of like the full suite of programs that they have to lower their tax bill, lower their construction costs, lower whatever it is, because the city is paying for those things or whatever, or finances. Often what you'll hear is like they'll have a loan that comes from HPD that is way lower of a rate than what they can get through, you know, JP Morgan or whoever, and tied to paying off that loan at the end of a 30-year mortgage essentially is a balloon payment of all the deferred costs that they had. And so essentially HPD either is going to get a ton of money back at the very end, or what most often happens is when you hear these, it's only affordable housing for 30 years, is that there's a huge incentive, like a big carrot and stick at the end of the 30-year period to get the housing developer to come back to the table with HPD to extend the length of time with those for those affordable housing, affordable units in those buildings. The city has learned from their mistakes and has done a lot better of a job in negotiating these deals and adding these new subsidies and new programs through HPD. They're not, I'm sure, I don't want to say that they're all perfect, but like that's a broad brushstrokes of what we're asking for is from HPD is to do better funding those things, but do it for stuff in our district.
That's so interesting.
Gail?
Are we asking in this request, could the request be re-asked or in the letter to specify to encourage funding? Or did we see this and I'm not seeing it right?
I mean, you could in your letter say, obviously not obviously, that's just, we'll speak, but we were giving a broad request, but if there are specific policies or programs or initiatives or whatever at HPD that you would like us to identify in our future, you know, district needs statement, please let us know.
Okay, thank
I mean,
you.
that's just
That was
thoughts.
very informative, Will. Thank you.
Gail?
Thank you. I think it's an issue that's really even more fundamental. Certainly the tax incentives, the programs asking for all of that makes sense. But as I understand it, over the years, the community board has always advocated for ways to provide more affordable housing in our district. And the Upper East Side, the way the city has responded without it saying it in writing, but through action, is, well, that's where all these wealthy people live, and they don't really need the affordable housing. And the fact that we have so many people who are rent challenged in our neighborhood that somehow are in the letter to try to also just address that perception that we tend to actually get less affordable housing than a lot of other city neighborhoods, and that we definitely need it here as well as elsewhere. Somehow or other to kind of make that point clearer, because that has always been the case, where, oh, you don't really need it on the Upper East Side.
And is there data on that we're losing affordable units?
Yes, there is. And
Let's-
actually we can get that from Marco, because what he's done is he's looked at, for example, the tearing down of the tenements and then the rebuilding with the taller, more luxurious skyscrapers, where the housing is not as affordable as the tenement housing had been, in part just because of the cost of building. And the as somebody pointed out before, if the developer doesn't have the 421A, as Barbara said, or a similar tax incentive, they've made it clear that they're not going to build. So when it's as of right on an avenue, there's nothing that forces them to provide the affordable. But I know that Marco has put a chart together, and I can ask him for it and then send you that information.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll re-bring that up when we get to the actual letter writing, because that gave me an idea, but I wanted to get through the stuff first. So if I don't bring that up again, please remind me. So Michelle and Barbara, then hopefully we can go to the next item.
Well, I was going to echo or maybe elaborate on Gail. Yeah, on what Gail said. Marco did a whole study of the area. and he has the actual numbers of affordable housing that was lost. And the thrust of his stats reinforces the fact that the lack of height limits on the avenues are promoting, as of right, buildings. You're getting 300 and 400-foot buildings, but they are low density buildings. There's no requirement. I mean, many of them have one apartment or two apartments on a floor. So it could be the equivalent of 40 stories, but they've either torn down tenements in the process and therefore lost affordable housing, or they have purchased the air rights from those tenements. And if the tenements actually remain, there's still no requirement to increase the quality of the livability of the apartments in those tenements, because there's no incentive for the landlord to do it. Once he's received money for the air rights, he makes do with whatever he can get away with, necessarily cost-wise, in the building. So, but anyway, that's something that could be mentioned in your letter when you're looking for talking points about low density buildings are being built.
So thanks. We'll circle back to this when we get to the letter. Barbara?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I think I clicked too fast. Just one comment. What drives me nuts is, and I can use William Friedland's building as an example. So what they do is they empty out the affordable housing, but they don't build. So even, which I agree they don't, but even if it was 1-for-1 and a real parity, it's years and years and years before the new building is built, and more so because people like William Friedland, and I don't mean to pick on him, but he just came in front of us, are not building because they don't have the incentives. So one of my pet peeves as I walk through my neighborhood in particular, further east, is that there's empty lots all over the place. There's boarded up empty buildings because nobody wants to build. So I would love something to say we encourage, and maybe that would be the letter, that we encourage encouragement by the city, tax deductions or whatever by the city.
Just for the record, Barbara was not referencing Billy Freeland, who's a board member.
No, William Friedland. And the other thing
No,
I
I
would
know.
say is we all say we want affordable housing, but every time one comes, there's always gotchas. There's not enough parking, there's going to be something on the street, and we have to be honest whether we really want affordable housing or not.
Can we skip over 7 just for 1 second? Because I want to make a brief comment about 8, which I think might save us some time. So
Okay.
8 was one of the park requests, which basically they said it was partially funded. We have both Felice and Judy on this call. I trust them immensely. They're experts. I think if the group is okay with this, we leave it to the co-chairs of the Parks and Waterfront Committee to decide how they want to answer their related requests. We can go through any ones that, flag, but this is something, we have 2 experts. I think we don't need to spend too much time in this meeting commenting on them. Unless Felice or Judy, you disagree, that's up to you.
No, I was only going to say it is partially funded, and we are planning on writing a letter to both the mayor and our council member seeking additional funding for these projects.
Great. So I think that, we'll leave it to you guys. And obviously, Felice is the co-chair of this committee too. So we'll have a thorough response. And the reason I skipped over 7 is because I know there's a couple people on the call for whom this is a hot button issue. So I think there'll be quite a bit to say, which is about providing a new or expanding an existing high school. Barbara.
Me? No. Sorry.
Barbara, you're unmuted. So did you have your hand up from the last thing, or?
Yeah, I didn't mean anything about the high school.
Okay.
Okay, Judy, and then Michelle.
Police, does item 6, is it about the park, item 7, about the park, about partially funded?
Well, it's 24
no, where
Sycamores
are we?
Park, which we were gonna ask for more money for. The other about, the East River
Well,
Esplanade.
and there's also Andrew Haswell Green Phase 3, where you're talking about maybe $40 million. So, I mean, we're not partially funded. Phase 3 hasn't been funded at all. 24 Sycamores is partially funded, but we need a chunk to finish that, which, as Felice said, we're going to write, but there are other projects along the Esplanade that need funding as well. So I don't know what
Yes, that's why
partially
I think
funded means.
that's why I think you guys should take over answering that part. We typically always had a parks kind of section of the letter because we actually have, I think I used to remember how low we are on the rankings of all districts when it came to open space. But I think that's something that,
Yeah, we're the
you guys
lowest
have dealt
in
with
the
in your
game.
committee.
Yeah, Felice, you
Yeah.
and I can do that.
Yep.
Okay, Gail or Michelle, can you raise your literal hand if you want to talk about parks? Okay, so we'll go to Gail first.
Obviously, all these requests are important, but what I've noted, having been a product of government for a period of time, is that I think that in some way we have to really determine what our priorities are. Because what happens is when we ask for funding for so many different projects and your Parks Department says funds are insufficient, I don't know how in the letter you would prioritize it or how you're doing that, but I would assume that there's got to be within all of these requests, one or two that are the most significant. And maybe that's where the major emphasis is placed, because when you ask for money for too many different projects, the easier thing for government to do is just say, well, you want everything and we can't give it to you. So that would be my thought.
No, of course. And I think we can get more into that when we get to the letter. And I think what we'll do, since this is not going before the full board, we'll vote on essentially what we think the letter should be. And then those board members who are in attendance will receive a draft and we'll be able to comment. I think that's the best way to move forward, but we can talk more about that in the next section. So let's go to Michelle.
Yeah, so if we're going back to the schools,
Yes.
I think that is very, very, very high priority for District 2 all around, especially in our neighborhood. The classes are overcrowded. Our children, especially the middle school and high school kids, are traveling all over the city to end up in a school when in reality they should be able to attend a school within their district and reasonable traveling times. Also, the additional burden of all the immigrants that are coming into the city. Those children, whether or not they're in a shelter, wherever they're being housed, those children are in the school system. And that means also money for different languages, teaching in different languages, but the bottom line is more seats. And this has been a pressing problem for us before this influx. So certainly now it's even more important. And I would like to see this moved right up to the top of the list.
Yeah, so, and I think what's of note here is this year we received, please contact the agency directly and promptly for more information, which we're just assuming means they didn't get a chance to respond or they didn't have the time to respond. Every year we've had this, and essentially they've usually said further study is needed. I think at this point, the lack of an actual answer has become unacceptable. And I'm sure Michelle agrees with me on that.
And I think the big issue here is the way they have changed the admissions process. Qualified students from this district are not getting into what is essentially their local high school. And so either admit more from students from District 8 rather than forcing them to travel all over the city or to different boroughs, or build a new high school.
Judy?
Yeah, I think Felice hit it right on the head. We got the new high school, which on the tip of my tongue, I can't think of it. The last high school we got, and it ended up that our children from our district, it was supposed to be 50% of the kids from Community Board 8 would attend. Now I think it's a third of the children from all of District 2, which goes down to the tip of Manhattan School Board District 2, can attend, and we have kids from all over the city there. So the fact that they built us a new high school doesn't mean, that our children are going to end up going to that school, because when Barry was chair, he fought for that school. That was one of the big accomplishments that came right after he left as chair of the board. And now,
I think that's right.
And now our kids, the majority of kids attending are not Community Board 8 kids. So if we
I
get
think that's a great point. I think that's a great point, and we should highlight that in the letter. And we should also be sure in future district needs statements and, our capital request to specify that aspect of it, because, it should have been enough that we as a community board representing a community district were requesting this for our constituents, but I think we should be more specific in the future. So now we're on to 9. Oh, that's also parks, and we've already agreed. So now let's go to 10, improve traffic and pedestrian safety, including traffic calming. Install crosstown bike lanes approximately every 10 blocks between 60th Street and 110th Street on both sides of Central Park, and a 2-way protected bikeway around Central Park. Bike path, their response was, bike path enhancement requests will be reviewed as part of the federally funded bicycle network development program. We don't have any transportation experts here who might be able to speak to that program. Will, I don't know if you have anything you want to say about this one, or whether there's, let's go to Will first, and then we'll turn it over to the committee.
You're talking about number 10?
Yes.
I don't have any extra information about this.
And if I could just add, I think this partly came out of that young woman who was killed on 85th Street, where there was no bike lane, and that came as part of the request. And there's probably data on the increase in fatalities among bike riders, and so I think it's fair to say in a response that this is a safety issue, and we need more dedicated bike lanes. So if they're only where they're waiting for federal money, there could be city money used as well. It doesn't have to be federal funds. So I would point to the safety need for this.
Yeah, and sorry, the federally funded program came out of the Biden infrastructure, big thing that they passed, which does have, lots of money available for redeveloping roadways and stuff like that to make them better for bicyclists and et cetera.
So before we call Michelle, I just want to say, I think it's fine to reference this in the letter. I just would not make it one of our top, 3 things, just because I actually think the city is more likely to follow through on bike lanes than they are on some of our other requests. I think it's worthwhile to, share our continued support. We've passed resolutions regarding a lot of this, but I think this is actually one of the more likely things to happen, despite the response. Maybe some people disagree. Michelle?
And I'll flag one thing as we were talking about the letter, is each agency we're supposed to respond to just them. And again, essentially, it makes it easier for OMB to cut our letter apart and show it just just showed the one section that's relevant to parks, and one section is relevant to transportation, the DOT. So you know, there's no fighting amongst agencies in our letter, because the agency is only going to ever see the section of our letter that relates to their jurisdiction.
Was
All right,
there,
Michelle?
yeah, was there a specific resolution on these actual lanes?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't recall
I
the
think so.
specific resolution.
There was a
that's
specific resolution calling for exactly what the explanation says. The
Yeah,
installation of parking protected crosstown bike lanes approximately every
on
10
these
blocks.
blocks.
Yeah, it doesn't say
Actually,
specifically
well-
which blocks. It gives it DOT's purview
Discretion.
to discretion, yeah, to figure out which of the blocks in that 10 block range make the most sense, and start with those. And then if they ever want to add in, you know, in between, you know, yay or whatever. But we just wanted, you know, approximately every 10 blocks for there to be a parking protected crosstown bike lane, plus the circle around Central Park. Like, that's in our resolution that we approved.
Yeah.
Well, this is maybe, sorry, Michelle, keep going.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but there is some evidence out there. I mean, I think if you handle it in the way you said, that you're not highlighting it, because you're probably right, it's going to happen anyway. I think that's a fine way to handle it, because we're asking for a lot and we have other priorities. My particular point of view is that as I read the stats and follow this in the news and everything, that the number of accidents involving cyclists is increasing. And it's increasing because there's a larger number of cyclists. So automatically you're going to have more accidents, and you're going to have more and more accidents the more you encourage more cycling. So I don't necessarily believe that this infrastructure is helping the cycling public. I think it's putting more and more people at risk, because it's a sense of safety that doesn't really exist, and it's increasing the numbers, and we can never catch up. But at any rate, that's for another day. But I want to agree with you that I don't think that this needs the kind of focus that a school needs or something like that.
Thank you. And again, it's, we kind of did, when we get to the letter, we basically did what they asked before. But if we really are going to, you know, structure things to the agency, I think maybe we should think about the kind of introductory paragraph to make sure our like key capital and expense, you know, concerns are re-highlighted for the mayor and the elected officials. And so that was kind of what I was referencing as well. I'm fine to include this when we respond to the relevant agency, right? But I just don't think, since, again, I'm not saying I disagree that this is an important issue. I just think we have a lot of things we're asking for that unless we kind of put our whole weight behind, they might not happen.
And 11 and 12 are the same as 8 and 9 on the parks. Judy and I will put together a response.
Do you want to do 13?
Sure. You know, we've asked for rat-proof garbage containers. You know, the city has done a lot to try to address the sanitation issue by requiring commercial establishments to put their garbage in a container on the street. They're looking towards requiring residential buildings to do the same. So I think that's doing a lot. So this is something that gets funded by the local elected officials. You know, they said local elected officials, businesses, or community groups. So my question is, what do folks think about this? Michelle?
I think it's also, oh, Michelle, you can go first.
Yeah, I wanted to add to this. Well, first of all, on the issue of the rubber, you know, the rat-proof cans. The city did a strange thing to my mind. I mean, my building bought rat-proof cans ages and ages ago, and what they are is rubber, and they have a fixed lid. The good thing is that rats can't get in. With the rubber, they really can't smell what's inside. They can't get past it. And when you move them, they don't make noise so that you don't have that rattling of cans. But I would like to add something else to this. And that is, a few years ago in the Transportation Committee, we passed a resolution, which I proposed, of putting there, I don't know what they're called, but you'll know what I'm talking about, but putting there are guards that can go on the back of sanitation trucks. They can go on the back of all trucks, but we have to be concerned with what we're asking the city for, not private. And they are guards that if those back wheels, if somebody is caught or backed into it, these guards push them away from the truck. And we passed that resolution ages ago. And to my mind, I guess it was dropped because I never heard anything more about it. I know it exists. Maybe it was under consideration, but I would love to see that added to this.
I think there is legislation passed that requires it. I will double check, but
I believe that the fleet is actually moving almost entirely to having these, just slowly. I ask about this every year when we meet with the Department of Sanitation, and I'll look and see if I can pull the information that they responded last year, last summer.
I think they said that they didn't fund those type of things at that time.
But that, we're talking about
our last request.
The rear guard.
The
rear guard.
We're talking about two separate things, Rebecca.
Okay. Sorry.
She's talking about converting the fleet to have the what do you call them, Michelle?
I don't know what the name of it is. But
no, this is for trucks, Rebecca, not for trash cans.
Trucks. I said, let me repeat. Our Transportation Committee, dealing with accidents that were coming to us by people getting stuck under the back wheels of trucks. We can't mandate what a private trucking industry will do. Maybe the state will.
I actually think the city did.
I think they did.
But the city can certainly be in charge of their own fleet of trucks, the bulk of which are sanitation, and to make sure that these protective guards are on the back wheels of all of their trucks. So I don't know, I will, if you can find out what point they're at, that's great. But whether or not we know, I think we should include it in this comment on sanitation trucks. You're increasing the number of sanitation trucks, and we would like to request to put these rear guards that we'll have to find a good way. I'll look it up. There's a name, I'm sure.
I don't think we can talk about that with this issue though, because the category, remember, when we make a request, we have to go, we have to choose a specific category. So while this says sanitation trucks, we're actually talking about other equipment.
So if I could just add, it is the law. Trucks are required to have side guards, and specifically, the question about private sanitation vehicles, it's required on trade waste vehicles regulated by the city as well. So it applies to city vehicles, it applies to private vehicles. It is the law as of 2021.
Oh, so we could assume that all those trucks, city or otherwise, that are on the road have these guards?
I don't know that I would assume anything, but it's the law that they're required to.
So since we're talking about sanitation trucks, even though you're mentioning other equipment, couldn't we just
We don't reference sanitation trucks at all.
Why not? It says sanitation trucks.
So I'll explain one thing really quickly that's helpful for everybody here. Our requests, the actual language of the word, like the wording after the word request, those are pre-written by OMB requests. So I can't change the language of what that says. I couldn't leave out the word sanitation trucks in that request because it's pre-written. I'm just selecting the most relevant request for what we are actually asking for. So I always tell people, don't look at the word request, don't look at the line with the request, look at our explanation of what it is that we're asking for. So in this case, Michelle, our request had nothing to do with sanitation trucks. That is just the pre-written, like, you have a pick
I
menu,
understand.
and
Can
I had
we
to
add
pick
it in
that
the
one.
explanation? Do you have any room in the explanation? The other thing, let me talk about the rat-proof garbage containers. My understanding is the ones that the city are putting out are big rectangular garbage containers that really take up a significant part of the sidewalk. I don't really understand why they went to that when you can get this in garbage, the regular round garbage can size, and you can put out 1, 2, 3, however many you need. They're on wheels, so they can be moved easily to the truck and to the shop or whatever. And I don't know why they came up with the big rectangular ones, which you're not mentioning in the explanation. But I understand what you're saying about the request, Will. And so do we have room in the explanation to put any of
The
this additional
explanation,
info in there?
we can't
So-
add to an explanation. We can do it
Yeah,
in the
so-
future, though.
I
Yeah,
thought
this is the wrong time of year to be doing this conversation. So right now we're responding to what we already wrote and what they responded to us. In the fall is when we do our crafting of new requests. So they've responded to our request. We can't change the request that we had
I
for
get
them.
it. Okay, so we'll save it for
Next
the fall.
fall is when you
Okay.
should
Yeah.
make a new request that
Okay.
involves, whatever it is that you want to add
Yeah.
to it.
Okay.
Right now, all we have that's in front of us is we asked a question, they gave a response, and we're rebutting their response.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
All right, so we're gonna skip over 16 because it's, oh wait, no, not 16. We're gonna skip over 14, sorry, and go to 15. 14 is parks. So you go ahead, Felicia.
Yeah, we'll respond to the parks in general. The priority is 24 Sycamores and Andrew Haswell. So we'll figure out a way to craft that so that we can focus on the two priorities as well as the Esplanade. And I'll coordinate with Judy on that. I think this one is a larger issue, and this is one that Valerie's brought up. She says that there's a need for a catch basin that's not there. So I guess that's a bigger project.
Really agree with this. It's a street and avenue I cross often. It's a dangerous intersection. I do think we should reference it in the letter, especially since, it was one of the non-responses. And I really would like us to, and we can coordinate with the office on how we want to do that step of at least reaching out to the agencies, right? So that we can be, firm in our letter.
Okay.
The next is provide funding for a ramp or other means of accessibility at the Yorkville Branch Library. We appreciate that this project is in front and planning and request that the project be accelerated as accessibility of the libraries is critically important. It says that NYPL supports this project. It is currently in front and planning with CDC, which is not really answering what we said. So I would like us to highlight this again with the other, making libraries accessible. I think it's extremely important. Gail? Oh, you're muted. Sorry. Hold on.
Okay. No, I was going to say the same thing. If we're talking about a lift, if we're talking about a ramp, it's accessibility and kind of just pointing that out. And also, I believe that we are the district with the largest number of
We are
seniors.
seniors.
So, and then others, but whether you're a mother with a stroller or anyone benefits, somebody with a heart condition, what have you. So I think that accessibility issue is something we really have to emphasize. That's it.
No, and I will say just some of you are newer and may not have met her, but Barbara Chalky, who used to chair this committee by herself, this was something she advocated for every year. And I would love us to finally get all of our libraries to be accessible. All right, so the next one, we're almost done with capital projects. All right, 17, also parks, so we're gonna move on, same with 18. So now these are, if it says CS, it means continued support. So we had two. One was a park project that they said was recently completed, which was on the Esplanade. Judy and Felice, is that true? Has it been completed? Can you confirm that?
Phase 2B of Andrew Haswell Green Park has in fact been completed and had a groundbreaking, and is absolutely beautiful.
Great, so we don't have to
Sorry
do
to
anything about that.
disagree. Sorry to disagree, Felice. It hasn't been completed.
2B?
Yep. There's all the piling work, which is going to take 2 years. That's all part of 2B under the former sanitation garage.
Okay.
So I would leave
Okay,
it.
so I'm
at-
glad I asked. I
I'm-
hope you include that in your section then, because that's a
Yes, I would leave it under continuing support, because what happens if the money disappears all of a sudden, or something
Yeah, you
happens
have
to
to
the
reference it
contractor?
in the letter. You have to reference it. Scale?
Until Judy made her point, I didn't realize that it wasn't completed. But I think that we should in some way compliment them for progress that's being made, what have you, just to let them know that even if there's something that's still outstanding, they're moving forward, and we're hopeful that the funding for phase 3 will be allocated shortly or something like that.
No, I totally agree. And I'm glad you said that, because I don't like when they respond incorrectly. So I might have not thought of that myself. The other continuing support was also a parks thing. So I'll leave it to Felice and Judy to comment, but Felice first.
So Rupert Park is funded, but we're still waiting for it to move forward and actually get started. So it's continuing support. It's funded in the design phase. That's not true. I certainly hope
So
not.
that's what I was going to ask, because even the answer seems strange. Is the project that is funded only the design phase portion? It seems very vague to me. Judy?
Well, there's
Up to
the
the
park, and
restrooms,
then
right?
there's the restrooms, right? So it's like two separate things. I mean, that's definitely still continuing support. And I don't know, Felice, maybe you and I want to look at it more carefully and write something about this.
Yeah, the design build procurement for the restroom and several other restrooms, the restroom at Rupert Park and several other restrooms throughout the city is actually out on the street, and they're soliciting qualifications for potential bidders.
Yeah, but that
But
won't
still-
happen till the end of the year. So I certainly would not take that off continuing support.
I agree.
Well, we're not taking anything off. It's just whether or not, right, we're going to comment on them. So I think just because there was a little confusion with the last continuing support, it might be worth ending your section with some comments about these two items. So with that, I'm excited that we're finally moving on to expense, budget priorities and requests. And I would just like to say something about number 1. This is something I was so glad we listed as number 1, which is, increasing funding for community board budgets, especially to pay our staff properly. I was unsatisfied with their response that, although I am grateful that we're not losing funding, I basically said our funding is being maintained. We are asking for increased funding. Because I will remind everyone that we listed a position that, request preferred candidates with a master's degree, and we were not offering them more than 50K. And I think that is unacceptable. So I would hope to highlight this in our letter. I think it's important that we continue to advocate for this strongly.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, police, I'll let you take the next one.
Okay, we're looking for additional homeless outreach services for homeless people out in the community. Again, this is a non-answer, so what do we can respond and continue to request more and say we would like an additional information from this response.
And actually, maybe just while we're on another one of these, please contact the agency. Is there a way you would prefer to do it? Would you want us to draft an email and it come from you to the, relevant person at that agency? Maybe we can talk offline, but it's something to think about. And
I honestly think what we probably should do, this is a lot of work. This is so much work. Okay, I actually think that it might be worthwhile to individually write a letter responding to each item. That way, when you write a letter on something, obviously this is not for us to get a response before we can send an email asking for, if there are updates on these items. But what I think ultimately,
we should do that simple. I think we should do that simple step just because
Yeah.
I think our letter is stronger. We reached out, but then keep going with your other thoughts.
Yeah. So I know I think that you're right. So for these that have insufficient, actually non-existent answers, I think we should just email each agency and say, these were the requests we made for your agency. We'll confirm with OMB that they can confirm that you did not turn in your answers to these questions and in the time for it to be published. Have you produced written answers to these yet? And if so, could you please share them with us as soon as possible? So that would be an email. And then I do think it may be worthwhile as a committee, as a community board, taking each answer, taking each request, and doubling down with a letter from the board saying, why did you not think that this was worth spending more money on or whatever, because I think if you produce a document that is serious and efficient and quick to the point of here's our question, what are you doing about it? It is an expectation that you can get a response from that agency to your letter. And eventually you can also publish those letters to Patch, to Cranes, to whoever, and saying we've written this letter and nobody from DYCD has responded.
Great. So I think both of those ideas are great. Before I call on CJ, and if anyone else wants to offer any ideas or whatnot, I think Felice, Will, Valerie, and I will speak offline and we'll find the best way to do both of those things in terms of, committee responsibility and, the staff. Because I don't want those letters, in my opinion, need to be written by Felice and me. A simple outreach, depending on, the availability of the office, can be done by them. So with that, let's go to CJ.
Yeah, and I think you can formulate those letters so it's pretty easy to plug and play.
Yeah. I just don't want to put a million letters on you guys. So
yeah, I appreciate that. You saw my face as I realized how much work I was assigning myself.
But the emails, we can have a standard template,
Exactly.
Please try and get back to us, right? CJ?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm, Will, do you mean send letters for everything under the expense budget and the capital budget for those that we got, please contact the agency directly and promptly for more information, or just the expense budget?
Absolutely both.
Okay. I just want to put it out there that I'm happy to help write those emails when the time comes.
Oh, that's great. We'll definitely take you up on that. And, I think we can get a group. If anyone else wants to volunteer, maybe we send an email and we just divide by agency.
Okay, great. We ask for increase in summer youth employment program. The response is that they have increased funding, so I think that's great. It doesn't seem like there's a need for additional response.
I think I agree. It's been like 2 or 3 weeks maybe since I reviewed the mayor's budget, so I'm not remembering like how much they actually increased it by. I don't know. Well, you probably don't remember either, right?
Wait, what was the question?
The summer youth employment program. 'Cause
I don't remember the amount. This is took me a long time to find this answer, but Department of Sanitation did say that all of their trucks will have side guards installed before 2024. So this is now 2024, so we can assume that they actually did that, but I knew I had the answer somewhere in a document and I had to like search through all of my inbox to find it.
Yeah, I'll go through my notes on this one. I don't think we have to respond unless they like increased it by $1, which I don't think is the case.
Well, and last year
this is something.
Last year it had been a big bump up. So if it even maintains the same level of funding, that's a huge improvement.
Well, this is something that Tricia, myself, and a bunch of other people really advocated for in 2020 when the program was at risk. And I think our board has done a good job of advocating for this issue. So I would just like to double check that. And if for some reason it's like a fluke and they didn't increase funding or whatever, we can comment on it. But otherwise, I don't think we should. We can thank them if anything, but I just don't think we want to have too much flowery language in the letter. This one, I think we'll have a bunch of comments on, which was to fund pre-K and pre-K seats in CB8. We've had multiple issues. This was a non-answer. Michelle.
I was going to comment on the youth thing just very quickly. I don't know if it helps our response. My recollection is that it was cut from the budget, and then there was so much fuss made about it that it was put back in. Yeah, Will is nodding. Yeah, that was the case.
That's what we did.
Yeah, so no, I mean from the city budget. It was cut.
No, I know.
Yeah, so I would imagine when it says it's increased funding, I will be lucky if we got back what they originally cut. We got anything.
Yeah, that's why you're raising my exact point. I just want to double check it because I don't remember. And it's a really important program.
Okay.
While my hand is up, if you're going to number 4, my issue with pre-K, and I have said it all along, I'm concerned. I mean, I'd like to fund everything, but I always worry about this because I think it takes seats away from elementary school, from whatever the capacity is in an individual school. They don't necessarily add locations to provide for this. So I object to it if it takes away seats from a school. We don't necessarily know that, nor do we say that in our commentary. So
are you talking only about pre-K or both 3K and pre-K?
3K and pre-K.
Okay.
That's my concern about it, but they don't necessarily inform us of where we're getting these seats from. So that to me is the concern. I mean, you can't be against it because who wouldn't want it? But of course we want it. But if it takes away seats in PS 6, 151, whatever the school it is, and those schools are already overcrowded and have larger class sizes, then I'm not in favor of this. But they don't give us any real, we're not more specific in what we're asking for, and they don't give us any specific information in their answer.
Yeah, so I think this is one we will reach out, and then I want to go to Gail, because what I was going to say is I know the youth education libraries and I think the women and families committees have thought about this quite a bit. We've had multiple meetings over the years and it's been a big concern. I don't think it automatically takes away other seats, but I know it's something, and don't quote me because I'm probably wrong. We have a very, very, very low number of pre-K and 3K seats for our population. And I think that's something we've heard year after year has been a concern. I think this is something, again, to note for the future. We should specify that it's for kids in District 8 that we are advocating for. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gail.
Okay, I am unmuted. What I'll do is I'll get you the answer on the summer youth program, because our foundation, the New York City Academies Foundation, we use that program for a lot of our high school students for internships.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was supposed to actually be expanded to cover 100,000 jobs for the summer youth. And then it was cut, but then it was restored. I don't know if it was restored to the same level as last year, but I'll certainly find that out and then let you know.
Thank you. Do you have anything on 3K or pre-K?
I know that we have far fewer seats that are actually open to kids in our neighborhood. It's the same problem that Judy raised for the high school, that particularly with pre-K and with 3K, mothers who now are getting on subways and having to take their kids to Lower Manhattan, then they're late for work. And so it's definitely, there's a shortage, but I haven't seen any statistics for the past year or two, except the fact that there's still a hue and cry about the fact that there are far more kids that are being born in our neighborhood and fewer spots for them in both those programs. So, I mean, I think that that's another issue when you're writing the letter, being able to point out that our community is not being served properly, both with the shortage of adequate seats, but also with the fact that serving kids from other communities where so many of our youngsters, particularly the pre-K and the 3K, are not being accommodated. I think that's really essential.
And that's leads to this other issue, which is our board has done a great job of advocating for all New Yorkers. But I think this document, the district needs statement, and our letter in response really has to be targeted towards our community district. This is our chance to really represent the concerns of this area and advocate for them. So I want to make sure we're careful not to be, not to overly advocate for all New Yorkers on every issue, but really to try and make it district specific. I think that's the way we'll be the most successful.
Agreed.
Barbara, and then Judy.
Okay, I just want to say, I mean, Gail said much of what I want to say, but just to add, this is such an important, they are such important programs. The children just blossom. It's not only an economic need for our community where we know the cost of daycare is so high, but these children that get out and they start learning and blossoming, that it is just an exceptionally important program that gets them started early on their academic career. From what I've seen, I don't know. I don't have, kids that age, but I see more and more it's the nursery schools that are in churches or even on the street and so on that are taking in that are sometimes private, but do have the pre-K, in other words, are being paid as public schools. So I think it's an extremely important programs, both of them, the pre-K and 3K.
Great. Judy?
Yeah, I have to disagree with what was said earlier. We're getting, and it's a Friedland building, William Friedland. It's taking a garage and on 65th Street and it's a 3-story or 4-story building, and it's going to be a pre-K building. I spoke to the school construction authority, and apparently they are aware of this need in the city, and they are building more of these. And we're certainly, I think this one is supposed to be open for next year, in September, or this year, I guess it would be. We're in 24 September, and it's pre-K. So they are doing, the school system is aware that it's needed, and they are building them. Where else in our community they're building, I can't answer that. But when I spoke to the guy, he just said to me that they are building them. So
I think
maybe,
it's worth
maybe we need to look
maybe-
into it a little more thoroughly before we say they're not doing it, because here we're getting a building that's going to have at least 100 kids, if not more.
I think the
I think
challenge is there's
Felice and
not
I
great
can
data.
reach out to, we can reach out to Taina and Addison, who are co-chairs of the Youth Education and Libraries Committee. I'm sure they've been following it closely. So the next one is item 5. The explanation is provide additional funding for youth services at the Isaac Center and give priority for Isaac Center programs to youth and adolescent residents of homes, towers, and Isaac houses. I think I would be shocked if we had any comments. I think this is something we want to mention. If anyone disagrees, please raise your hand. I think this is a very important thing.
And I'll just clarify that the comment from some board members about this was that while these are great programs, they don't prioritize the residents of those facilities, and so they can get closed out of those really terrific after-school programs. And so if they're going to be offered at the Isaac Center and the Home Center, then the residents of those buildings should get priority seating. Or
exactly. And their answer didn't really answer our question at all. They just said they increased funding. Did they?
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's worth like being like, wait a second, you know, Will?
I think it's worth like asking, how much did it increase? What programs did you increase the funding of? How many like hours? How many people? Like those are the, like when I was talking about like writing a letter for each one, that you could ask 10 different questions based on this one half sentence essentially of a response. You know, what are those programs? How much was the increase? Was it a nominal 1% increase, or was it a 50% increase? You know, and they should be answering those types of responses, but we're obviously not getting
Especially because this was in our top 5 requests, which I think should hold a weight, and I think we should respond accordingly. All right, so number 6 is parks. Still, I think it's a non-answer. We're going to trust Felice and Judy, and of course, everyone who is attending this meeting who is a board member will receive a draft. All right, let's go to 7. Felice, do you want to do that one?
Sure. So we requested an increased funding for food pantries, and it's something that that Gail has brought up before about the need and how some of these food pantries were underserved. So this is another example of kind of a non-answer. So if we're going to write to them or send an email, this is one of those situations in which we should respond.
I totally agree. I will also note that there have been articles about this over the past few months. The lack of, there was an increased need, especially with COVID, for food pantries, and the supply is not matching the demand. And this is something I think, Hunter, I'm no longer there. They had a food pantry. It's actually, the number of students has increased since like just this year alone. It needed to be restocked every week for thousands of dollars. This is like a really important thing that we need the city to take seriously and prioritize. So Gail.
Where the pandemic, fortunately, is under control, but inflation is not. So then now it's being offset by what the actual cost is of food. So the people who have been insecure unfortunately, for the past couple of years, still appear to be insecure. So I think this is really exceedingly important that we comment on it. And to your point, Rebecca, just kind of make them understand that it can't just be just talk to the agency. They really have to be proactive here.
Yeah. No, this one definitely personal to me because I was working with someone at the Hunter Food Pantry about this. So it's a real concern, and I hope we can, we'll comment on everything that's appropriate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the letter section. But this is something that our community desperately needs, and the city at large.
And if you have any data or anecdotal information from the Hunter Food Pantry, that would be useful to include as well. Or any of the food pantries. I mean, not that you want to give up something from Hunter.
No, we don't want to focus on one.
Demand.
We don't want to focus on one, but I think
I
would be very shocked if the data was not consistent amongst all food pantries.
Right. It's an example of an increasing need.
Yes. And we can have a couple of other examples as well.
Okay, great. Okay, so
I'll do. Oh, no, you go ahead.
Item number 8. So if we can scroll down to the next page. This is another issue with NYCHA housing in our district. I looked at the data on the number of open work orders, and it had been increasing. I think this, to Will's point before, we should ask for more specific information on what are they doing, what's the time frame, if they can accommodate it within existing resources, why are the number of open work orders on an upswing, so we can tackle that way. Similar issue about rental assist, increased funding for more permanent housing for homeless people. I'm not really sure what their response means, and it gets back to the question earlier about what are the specific things that we should be asking for. What are the programs? What are the sources? What are the options here? Number 10, it would be interesting to know why the city does not recommend increased inspectors for the enforcement of mobile food vendors and outdoor dining. I think in the letter we sent last year, we included a photo of a rat underneath one of the vendors. So I'm not sure why they don't think this is important. Michelle?
Let's turn it over to Michelle, yeah.
Who knows? It's no longer the Department of Consumer Affairs and Worker Protection. They moved the whole vendor situation over to the Department of Sanitation. And we had a representative, the head of the Department of Sanitation, at our last vendor meeting. I'm scheduling another vendor meeting for this spring, either early April or May, because there is always pending legislation to lift the cap on street vendors. There's a couple of very, very, very strong lobbies that want there to be an infinite number of of licenses given out. The enforcement team protocol never matches the amount of vendors on the street. There's never an appropriate ratio where a vendor to enforcer where you think that they actually can be serviced. This is just a category that has just run rampant in this city. There are no controls. There's very, very little enforcement. And you actually have members of the administration advocating for fines to be either dropped or, no enforcement for certain vendors who have been on the street and have accumulated an inordinate amount of infractions. That just tells me that they, the assumption, or at least what the vendor claims, that they're wrongly ticketed, but there are vendors that have thousands and thousands of dollars of infractions of tickets, and then the administration tries to get them absolved. So it's not unusual. It's like any other thing. If there are no repercussions, you can have rules and regulations. If there are no repercussions, then nobody follows the rules and regulations. If there's a minimal enforcement squad, then you don't have the ability to even find out. And in the words of the sanitation commissioner herself, or her representative for Manhattan, they told us that they're mainly focused on sanitation. Well, that's good, but there's a lot to be concerned about with vending aside from sanitation. So this whole category, this whole area is really just up for grabs in the street, all over the streets. And with the increase of the dining and, it's an open streets. I mean, the streets are just in a shambles, and this is one indication. I'll try to get more information about it at our next meeting. I'm hoping that the borough commissioner will attend the meeting. He was very forthcoming when he did, but I don't see, if anything else, I see the whole program. I see less and less control, less and less enforcement, and more of an appetite for deregulation, which is of concern.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. Gail, did you want to add something to that?
Only to reemphasize the fact that now that outdoor dining is permanentized, we always knew during the pandemic that there were not enough inspectors. All of the sanitation issues, forget the noise and all the other quality of life challenges. But the program is here to stay. So to not recognize it, in addition to the vendors and not even knowing who these vendors are, because if you happen to be handicapped, as Michelle knows, certain rights to be able to have a cart, but who knows who is actually there with them, and they're very blatant and they're parking in places that they shouldn't be. But then with the open dining and still having outside kiosks and everything else, I mean, I think we really have to make such a strong argument that this is totally unacceptable, and we just have no concept of why they don't feel that it's necessary to have more enforcement and concern about it.
Michelle?
Yeah, let me just add, you might want to change the agency. See, if you're now going to be sending a comment to the DCA, that's no longer the agency, it's the DOS. It's
Do
Department of
we have the
Sanitation.
flexibility to do that, Will?
I don't know how you handle that.
So we're still talking about number 10.
Correct.
Yeah.
So this is, yeah, it should be directed towards the Department of Sanitation. It's really and truly next year is when. But unfortunately, like, I guess the problem here is we put two things together that didn't need to go together, because food vendors are regulated under one agency, outdoor dining is a different agency, and we even wrote this to the an agency that doesn't oversee either of them. So next year you just need to separate these two and make sure you're directing them to the right locations.
But what are you going to do? Are you going to make any comment on this though? Like the outdoor dining is really the DOT.
Yeah, it's worth, I mean, I'm not going to speak for anybody here, but I think if you're writing a section, you're putting your section together for the DOT and you're putting your section together for the Department of Sanitation, you just say in your response, due to changes of who's administering this, we're asking you to take a look at this request,
Right,
since it probably wasn't filed to your office,
right.
as it should have been.
And if you're going to send commentary to the DOT, their directive actually was that all the existing sheds be taken down. With an eye towards, once the program is finalized, that the correct kind of shed would be rebuilt from that establishment, because they're not going to be permitted to be up 12 months of the year. So now that establishment has to consider the cost of putting it up, taking it down. It has to be somehow collapsible, or however they do it. Now, but the DOT is not enforcing. You could just wander around and you can see all the abandoned sheds, that are half up, half down. They're not enforcing any of it. And if you're not on the transportation committee, I'll tell you about an issue that I've been talking to Colleen about, and they have actually ticketed these people, but to no avail. And that is on the northwest corner of 89th and 2nd. There is a restaurant that built out the premises as a continuation of the actual restaurant. In other words, it's not a shed, it's not open restaurant construction on the other side of the street. They built a permanent extension with a floor and a ceiling and sides and a door and a ramp, completely illegally. It would be like you going out and extending the front of your apartment buildings just because you wanted to. Now, Colleen's been up there. The DOT has been up there. I think they've been fined, but to no avail. It's apparently, that to me was the most disturbing, that the enforcing agency had no teeth. In other words, they just didn't care. The fine is either the cost of doing business or whatever, but the enforcement, there was no teeth. And that's from like the DOT. So that's a general principle that's just infiltrating everything, and the vendors are part of it. There's no teeth in the enforcement. Nothing happens. Anyway,
Okay.
that's an overall problem. So these are two separate agencies that you would have to deal with if you're making commentary. It's no longer this one.
Okay, we'll clarify that in our response. Barbara, did you have something you wanted to add?
I'm sorry, I know this isn't the thing, but I know what Michelle's talking about. I watched it going up and I said to myself, why is this legal? Why do we wait until it's already done before somebody gives them a ticket? Why wasn't it stopped immediately?
And so Michelle she's saying she did report it right away. Okay, so let's move on. On number 11, we asked for accessible out of school time and daycare programs for all children in this district. And so I think, the city or OMB responded. There are a variety of agency funded programs. I think this is an example, to Will's point before, where we should, in our response, ask for specifics. Tell us what those programs are. And if there's an RFP process for more organizations to apply, then give us more information about it so that we can help publicize it. Okay, number 12. We asked for more rodent extermination in the parks and services. They are responding to 311 complaints. I think if there are specific locations that we want to identify, that will help them address it. We did say on East 96th Street and 2nd Avenue. But if there are other specifics that we want to identify, then we should ask for that. 13 was extended library hours. Was something we've been asking for many years.
Yeah. I'll add this is something, again, I know I mentioned Barbara before. This is a big thing. And I really think it's been at least 5 years since we've been asking for this. If anyone, thinks it's something we shouldn't highlight, please raise your hand and comment. But I think it's really important, because a library is not just about books. It also gives internet access to people who might otherwise not have it. And I think it's something we want to continue to advocate for strongly.
You want to take the next one, Rebecca?
Sure. 14. I mean, this is park safety, fund additional PEP officers to enforce park
Oh, yeah.
rules and all.
I'll just go
You
into
know,
the whole
I really
parks
leave this
thing.
one to you guys, so I'll
Yeah.
take the next one.
Yep.
Which is, you know, provide funding for rodent exterminators in all parks with CB8. Again, essentially a non-answer. They'll accommodate the issue within existing resources. I know this is something Julie Menon has worked very hard on. Our community district is not just Julie's district, right? Keith is also our representative. So I maybe wonder if we want to forward this to the environment or the, you know, sanitation committee or something, to ask them to maybe evaluate the non-Julie side of the district and what we've done to address this issue. Does anyone?
I do think as well as we have, you know, as we have brought up specific issues, you know, in locations, the Parks Department has done something when we've pointed out specific problems in John Jay Park or, you know, or Rupert Park where there's specific issues. There has been an effort to tackle it. We shouldn't have to, you know, I think the point is that we don't want to be responding on a one-off, you know, oh, there's a rat burrow over here. We'd like to see a more comprehensive approach to addressing rat remediation to the extent that it's possible. But we'll tackle that in
I
our
agree.
overall parks response. Okay, 16.
And we're almost done, I promise, and then we'll move on. Or we have a little bit more than I thought, but we're getting close.
Okay, you want to tackle this one?
Sure. So 16, increased recycling program, including solid waste, enhanced funding for composting and organics collection. You know, although the Department of Sanitation supports this program due to fiscal constraints, the availability of funds is uncertain. I will say I found their response actually kind of better than a lot that we usually get. There are obviously limitations to this budget given recent circumstances. I don't want to insult anyone, to Gail's point, when we respond. So I think we have to be careful in our letter, which we'll talk about soon, about if we get a real response like that, we can continue advocating, but I would not want to counter their response because I understand it.
Yeah, and maybe one of the things we might want to look at is just, you know, since they have put up composting bins around the district, is actually encouraging them to empty them more frequently. Because when I have tried to compost and I go onto the app, it says the ones right by my that are closest to me are full. And so I throw it in the garbage instead of walking, you know, to find one that's, you know, that's not so full. So maybe we can
Right,
just.
since already it's close to 8:30, let's try and speed through these. We're happy to read all of them, but I would say raise your hand if you want to either make sure that we focus, you know, highlight them in our letter, or maybe if you don't want to highlight them as well. That is worth raising your hand. So I'll do 17 and then Felice will do the next. Increase funding for services for older adults, including personal and home care, transportation services, Meals on Wheels, senior congregate care meal programs and case managers. You know, it's dependent on federal and state funds. I think that's something we can look into and decide whether or not we want to counter in our letter. But I don't think this, you know, this is obviously important to us. And yes, we're writing a letter, but our district needs statement reflects the needs of the community. So that lives in and of itself. 18, please.
We have asked for we have provided specific locations or the criteria in which to provide to look at it. So I think we can provide the same response that we provided before. This is similar to how they've responded last year, and we have actually provided the information.
No, that was a great thing we did last year. So we should do it again. 19, provide additional funding for children's services, especially programs to prevent abuse and neglect. I would say I actually wrote about this one in one of my community board applications. It's something we desperately need here. I've never been satisfied with their response, even though it's lower down. I hope we can include some type of response in our letter. And I have the statistics. They might be a little outdated from one of my applications. 20.
Okay, great. Will, can you scroll down to 20? Okay. Well, here's the outdoor dining program. We talked about that earlier. Enforcement of all food vendor regulations. We've also talked about earlier. 22. Sorry, go ahead.
Their response was, right, they'll accommodate this issue within existing resources. So when we get to the letter part, I would remind everyone it might be helpful to focus our conversation as well on how agencies responded, right? And whether or not, if they responded something like this, if that's your major concern, maybe we want to highlight it in a unique way. So 21, increase funding for the Department of Health, Mental Hygiene, enforcement of all food vendors, rules and regulations. We continued to improve our enforcement of vendors. Please call 311 with any complaints so we can inspect promptly. We appreciate input from the community. This is actually quite a nice response. We can decide, and you'll all see in our draft. Oh, I see Michelle has her hand up. But I want to say, I think their appreciation of community input might be something worth saying thank you for. Michelle.
Yeah, this is something we discussed at our meeting and actually I put that out there. They want to see the 311. That's how they're keeping track of concerns. Now, I did express to them, and of course it's true, people who walk around and see an infraction or they have a bad experience, they don't stop and call 311. But that's basically how they're tracking their concerns. So at my meeting, I invited all the attendees, and I still get emails. I tell them to send me the exact location, email me the exact location of the infraction. If they call 311, that's great. Send me the complaint number, and then I forward it directly to the contact that I have now at DOS. So I did sort of put myself in the middle of the reporting to give them an extra, a way to handle it. But even though I understand, 311 is how the city keeps track of everything. But when you're moving around your busy life, it's very difficult to just stop and call 311. You're on the line for a long time. You have to take down a number. I encourage them to do it online where you can actually also upload photographs. So it's an issue we've been working on, but I don't see any evidence of them actually increasing the budget for enforcement. The enforcement is woefully inadequate. And actually when they converted, well, first when they converted over to Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, they said that how many more enforcers they were going to have, but they didn't have the budget for it. And they ended up having just a couple for each of the boroughs, whereas they were projecting like 25, but it never happened. And now they moved it to DOS. So I can assure you DOS doesn't have an adequate amount either, or even the ones they were hoping to hire. I guarantee you they don't have it. So we'll take all this up at our next meeting, but handle it as you like. But now this is no longer the correct agency. So that's another concern.
Okay. The next, I think we're up to 23, about sidewalk, bridge and roadway repairs as well as sidewalk repairs. Funding constraints, the city does have a hiring freeze. So that is impacting issues. I don't know whether we want to respond to this and ask for anything more. Okay. Hiring additional DOB inspectors for code enforcement. We were not able to point to any specific issues. This is something we've had up on our list for a while. But when we talked about it at the last meeting, folks were not able to point to specific issues or problems. So I'm not sure if there's, if this
Sorry,
is
can you
something.
say the number? My computer got all messed up.
24. So
I mean, I think
Go ahead.
that we just talked about the hiring freeze, right? I think it's weird that they said they'd accommodate it within existing resources.
True. And then 25 is additional additional traffic agents and school crossing guards. Right. So it's a funding freeze. They're looking to fill their vacancies.
I will
we
tell
asked-
you, I'll
Go
tell
ahead.
you personally, this is about, traffic control agents and school crossing guards, and their response is quite thoughtful. It was based on the latest budget. The NYPD has a specific budgeted headcount, and they're working on filling the vacancies to get back to that. I have to say, so I used to work on the Upper East Side, so it was an easy commute. I now work downtown, and my toe has still been healing, so there's been a couple times I haven't taken the subway. And there is the most amazing traffic control agent near Wall Street, and I think their value is, under lauded for what it should be. So I do hope we kind of say that we really do count on them to fill these vacancies. And I think that's not a nasty response, but it's, at least we're on record saying, we see the value in these individuals and count on them to follow through in their response.
Okay. What are we up to now? Plant new
26.
trees. Elder
We're
abuse.
up to provide funding for eviction prevention services for at-risk senior citizens. Approval again of this request depends on sufficient federal and state funds. I'll turn it over if Barbara, my co-chair of Health, Seniors, and Social Services, wants to say anything. I think she might be raising her hand. I'm not
We've
sure.
had lots of meetings about things. We haven't had one in a long time. I remember we did have one with the district attorney, a couple of meetings actually over the years that talked about it. And Rebecca, if you think it's time to talk about it again.
I think maybe for this one, I think it's important. Maybe we have a meeting, but maybe you and I and Wilma can work on the language
so far
for
there's
this.
2 months. This month it's going to be this. I'm saying Safe Haven and I'm stuttering. I don't know what it is, but the new agency. Next month we thought we would do what I think I wrote to you about this, what Mark Levine came to talk about, the mental health initiative. But if you think this should be more important, we'll talk about it. It would be the district attorney's office, I think, that would come and talk about it.
All right, so plant new trees.
It could be I don't know, Will, would it be the district?
I think it could be the district attorney. It could be more people
they have
too.
programs. They are the ones that have done it in the past.
So this 27 install new trees were missing in CB8. Really glad we did community district 8 in this explanation. Nerdy side note, the agency will try to accommodate this issue within existing resources. I think just because the budget is obviously quite limited, it's very low down on our list. I think it's, again, to Gail's and others' points, we don't want to We can either respond to everything and maybe lose our what is most important, but this is not one that I'm not saying it's not important. It's just based on their response and the request itself, I think we don't need to highlight it. Unless anyone disagrees, you can raise your hand.
I mean, the only thing
Seeing
I
none.
would say is if we want, you know, both the Parks Committee and the Environment Committee have passed a resolution in support of Mark Levine's, you know, plant 1 million more trees. But I agree that this does not need to be a priority.
So I think, I mean, going back to Will's earlier idea about letters, this is something we might want to address outside of this particular letter. You know, our community board really operates either through resolutions or letters. Resolutions need the full board vote. Letters don't always, you know, do. So if that's something you want to bring up in old business or something in the Parks Committee and have a letter from Valerie to Mark Levine and, you know, Parks, et cetera, I think that might be a good idea.
Okay. 28, support for small businesses recovering from COVID-19. I'm not sure what else there is to add. Michelle?
I don't think you need to highlight this. There's plenty of federal funds for this. There's a lot of fraud that happened with this, unfortunately, that we're still recovering from. I don't think this needs any particular commentary.
I think we're also, as a board, I've seen it in my professional life, we're going to be dealing with this transition where we thought COVID was going to still be at that magnitude. I'm not saying it's completely gone, but I think we should shy away in this letter from using COVID as a rationale for any, you know, continued support, et cetera, of our requests.
Okay, and 29 was additional election day support, more maintenance, staff mechanics available to repair machines, ensure machines are working.
I think this is something we can pass on. I don't think we should highlight this in our letter. Of course, it's important. We have a voting reform task force. We can flag it for them that we included this in our request and hope that they as a committee or task force continue to follow up. Will, do you have any, I don't know, does that make sense? Is the task force still active? I'm not sure.
Our voting reform task force, yeah, it's still active. They're around.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
I know that Sherry actually sent an email to some of us and just asked if there are issues that their task force should undertake. So you could certainly, we could pass this on to her.
I think so, because, you know, it was a non-response, and so we'll email the agency anyway. But I think if this is clearly something that was, you know, probably raised by a member of their task force or them, you know, the co-chairs themselves, I think this is something that they should follow up on, especially as we're entering a, you know, new election season.
Yeah. Okay. I agree.
okay. I think
All right,
that
so we got through all of them. So could we now switch to B, info statements on the preliminary budget? Well,
Yeah, if you can hear me. I'm gonna make this much bigger so it's a little easier for you all to read.
so the first, as I mentioned earlier, our letter, and then I'll call on you, Gail, again, I promise. Unless, is your hand still up or no?
So I'll lower it.
So the letter is due February 15th. So we will not be able to vote on it as a full board. And since it is a letter and not a resolution, I think that's okay. However, I think that means we need to think about what we kind of want to vote on, because we should vote to approve a letter. I think we should approve a motion to the lines of, we went through all of the items, we came to some consensus, and you will be putting your trust in the co-chairs of the committee to draft the letter, and you will all be able to comment on that draft. And circling back to Marco, I wish he was here, but I don't think he should be able to comment necessarily on the full level, but I think we should turn to him for statistics. So Michelle or Gail, if you want to take on talking to him to get us answers to that note, I'm happy to do it as well. You just let me know. Michelle?
Yeah, you're talking about the affordable housing stats?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you just want the stats from him?
Just the stats, or maybe he might want to look over that one section.
So
I just like open meetings law wise, I don't think we can send him everything else, but I think we talked about his valued input on that particular section.
yeah, but let me understand. You mean you want to write it up and then send it to him for review and to insert stats, or you want him to send you stats and then
No, I
you'll
think
write
it
the
would be
letter?
helpful to get, I think it would be helpful to get the stats first, and
All right, well, I'll
then you
talk to
can
him
share.
because I'm in touch with him about this all the time.
Okay, so I think that's great. And yeah, I would say, as we've done in other budget committee meetings, just voting on a flexible motion that gives, the co-chairs and therefore you all who are in attendance, unless Will, you disagree. I think it's important to get the feedback of people here, especially since we, are trusting the parks co-chairs to handle their section.
Yeah, I think, historic precedence of these letters is that most of the time almost all of the time, they're not voted on by the full board. There's just the lineup of it being a 30-day window and it being in the middle of the month. It's just something that the board has almost never, if never, actually had a chance to vote on these. So you don't need to worry about that. I do think that, circling the wagon of all the people who are here and sharing it with them for any comments is probably best practice. So I think you're spot on what you're describing as a good way to have a productive dialogue. Or we had a productive dialogue. Now to have a finished product. Yeah.
And then before I call on Gail, I wanted to just mention two things based off of this number 2. So Will, if you can scroll down to the bottom of the first page.
Yeah, of course. Sorry.
Use these comments as testimony before the city council and the borough board in February and March. I think we can talk to Valerie about maybe doing that. And if she's not available, either I or Felice or somebody else who can, be a representative of the board can do so. I think that was a really great thing to see in their instructions. And the second is on the next page. If you see the bolded statement, do not just list your budget requests. I think this is basically tying back to what I said earlier, that this is really representative of the needs of the district. And we need that, introductory paragraph. So I hope we can do that. And I hope if you have ideas, you will express them now, or you can express them to us over email when we start the chain post the meeting. I think that's great advice. I'm glad they're asking for it because it's really hard to summarize everything we need based on these, 50 or so requests. All right. With that, let's go to Gail.
I was just going to second what Will said. I mean, committees all the time just get overall approval from the attendees, and then the co-chairs write the letters. Obviously, we're a small committee and we're happy to review the letter for you, but even under other circumstances, letters just get written based on the input that was secured during the meeting, and that makes it clean and fast. So it's a little easier.
Yeah, I just think I know Felice, I'm sure, shares the opinion. We just want to share it with you because we appreciate you taking the time to come.
So do we need this as a formal resolution?
Not a resolution, but I think we should vote on the letter just because we do operate.
You mean vote on writing a letter or vote on the letter?
So just vote on that you entrust, you entrust the co-chairs who will share a draft with you before
Yeah,
it
I
goes
think
out.
that's the,
Yeah,
I
that's
think
all.
that's the consensus of this committee, that we're saying
Right.
write a letter, and you've offered to share it with those of us who are on this call.
Right.
And I think
I just
that's
think if you
fine.
can turn that into a motion, it's just easier.
Okay, a
also
motion
minutes-wise.
to, a motion to do exactly what I just said.
Second.
Perfect.
Oh,
All right, so if anyone is on camera, I would ask you to be on camera or to raise your hand to affirm your vote. If anyone is going to vote no, please raise your hand. I see CJ went on camera. Judy, are you there? CJ is a yes. You can go off camera now. Thank you. Judy.
Judy, you can unmute. Oh, sorry, I just muted you. Sorry. Go back. Push it again.
Yes.
Thanks.
All
Judy.
right, so then it's unanimous. Does anyone have any old or new business? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, I would very much welcome
Move to
a motion to
adjourn.
adjourn.
I just
All right,
wanted,
Michelle and Gail, oh wait,
Just-
Gail, do you have something to
just
say?
very quickly, at some point, most of our committees do not require any type of funding from the community board, but given the activities of the Arts Committee, we now have 170 crafters who will be attending the craft show on February the 10th. But for the outdoor art show, we usually need some funding and we try to keep it minimal. So I would recommend that Alita go ahead. She's not here tonight, unfortunately.
I know
but
she
just to
did
submit-
email us. I will say it's a little difficult because we've allocated funding for the years. We can do emergency meetings, but we have already, we did give multiple staffers raises. So this is something that we should, I think, talk offline before we bring to a committee vote. Judy?
And Rebecca, also, you guys have a meeting scheduled for late spring before the art show, so that there is.
I thought the art show was in February.
No, this is the craft shows in February.
I'm talking about the June art show, and that will be just about the next
Okay,
fiscal
so
year,
then you
not
will
quite.
have time to address this, because what we do in our May or June budget committee meetings, we reallocate any surplus funds because we don't get them back.
And
Right, so that's how we bought all the owl cameras and stuff like that.
my other suggestion is that the budget committee, at least when we're putting together the overall budget, that we look at the office budget as well. So we have
Yes,
a much better
I've
handle
always
and
done that.
understanding. But the
I've
committee
always
at
done that,
large
and
doesn't.
I've also advocated for the arts committee, but I think maybe going forward, they should present a yearly budget before that meeting. Because we
Right.
did increase their budget, and we're kind of constrained, like as we mentioned in our number one expense issue, we asked for more
No.
funding. Their
No, I
answer was
understand.
like nothing.
I understand that, and I'm just saying from a best practices vantage point, understanding what the various breakdowns are of this community board 8 budget happen to be with current costs and expenditures and all would be something that is valuable and I think should be done, frankly, for transparency.
So I hope everyone will come to our next budget committee meeting. I think it'll be exciting, and I'm glad that I was wrong about which art show you were talking about. So we'll have a chance to hopefully help. But I think it's very important for a committee like that to, and I will talk to Alita about this, to have a yearly budget planned before we vote on the actual budget, because we're so limited. And my preference is always going to be taking care of our staff.
Yeah, and
Judy, did you
Gail,
have your hand up?
I was gonna say, Gail, you
sorry.
probably remember pre-pandemic, I would come into like a June meeting every year with like my folder
Exact
full
money.
of invoices, and show, this is what we spend on MailChimp, this is what we spend on Google now, because our costs have gone up, obviously, as you would expect with inflation and, changes.
Have we had to pay more for rent, or are we still covered?
Rent is fine. You should never worry about rent. Rent is negotiated by a city agency called DCAS, Department for Citywide Administrative Services. Whether the rent goes up I guess here's the best way to say it. Whether the rent goes up or down or sideways, we never have to worry about it because
Okay.
it's negotiated by the city. They negotiate it. They whatever, do the thing. And so if our rent goes up, we tell them our rent went up, and then they give us more money in the budget for it. So there's essentially all community boards have the same budget for personnel and operating, but then each community board has a separate budget line that is unique
Right,
to their
for
own board for their
OTPS.
rent or for whatever, maintenance of said building if they own a building and they're in a city owned building. So because we have a lease, we get a blank amount of money every year for our rent, and that's just decided by the city and it's not decided by us.
That's what I thought, but rents are kind of crazy these days,
Rents
even though
are.
I heard they went down recently.
I
But
considered, reaching out to DCAS to see if they could, because there's a glut of a larger office space, to see if they could find us a space that is bigger and more hospitable for hosting some sort of type of full board meeting, even almost. But we had just signed a new lease, so right before the pandemic. So I think you would have to be negotiating with the landlord,
And-
Cushman Wakefield, to do it. And so,
And actually,
Too
that leads
much.
to a really great point, which is we are no longer solely Zoom meeting on Zoom for full board and land use. Hopefully, we will always be able to find a space that's free. That's not guaranteed. I think, Valerie has asked for, your agendas, et cetera, from committees. I think that could be a great thing that people can start thinking about the budgetary side as well. Maybe I'll talk to her with Will about that. But I think you have to be very careful in terms of spending these days since we are now going to be meeting in person. And the blood center is unfortunately kind of off the table. And even Hunter, Will can speak about it. We have never always been guaranteed a free space. So we have to be smart and fiscally responsible.
yeah,
as
I know
board
for
right now.
I have had the pleasure of now being older district manager compared to a lot of my peers in Manhattan. And so I've had the pleasure of being a sort of mentor for some of them. And we all know Max. We remember Max from his days
And
here.
Maya.
Yes, but I was talking to Max, and Max and CB7 are having a really hard time finding venues where they don't have to pay. And we are thankfully have never had to pay for a venue, but you've noticed, I'm sure, that there have been some months where the calendar comes out and I don't have a venue yet for full board or for land use. So that is a reality that we have, that we're just going to keep having to ask. So there's also something to consider in your next year, your district service or district need statement is
And
maybe
if you have spaces that you're connected to and you feel comfortable asking if they would be willing to support, our community board
churches,
meetings, that would be a really great
synagogues.
service.
We love Ramaz is so kind to us to let us use their space.
Hey, Brian.
What's up? I thought someone was saying. Oh, but what I was saying, next year, as you're going through and making your list, we might need to start considering, this is an idea I'm stealing from Jesus at CB6, but we might need to start considering asking for dedicated spaces for community boards within their district that have enough space and facilities, meaning like cameras and whatever, to do these hybrid meetings. Like when we went to Cornell, I hope you guys noticed how smooth and easy that
yeah.
digital side was, because they have a facility set up exactly as we needed it for hybrid, conversation. So
And I will say that could be a conflict with adding funding to committees. Hopefully it's not. I think investing in more microphones so that we prevent what happened at some of our recent meetings where people who, of course, were excused and allowed to participate on Zoom didn't hear anything.
yeah,
So we just got to be really careful right now.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe next year you consider a capital request that is capital funding for community boards to get a space within the district that is has a capacity for a full board meeting and for a hybrid setup. Because I think where you get more community boards making that request, because I know CB6 is making that request, others are making that request, you know, it might actually get traction. Who knows?
With that, Will, Felice, and I talk about all this stuff all the time. If anyone wants to raise their hand for a motion to adjourn, that would be lovely. I see Barbara, and I'm taking Michelle and Gail as the second. Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you come to the next one.